Hi students, let's look at this concept here, which is cosecant, secant, and cotangent ratios. So these are new ratios, but they are just basically the reciprocals of sine, the ratios of sine, cosine, and tangent ratios, okay, are defined as below. So secant is actually the reciprocal of cosine. So 1 over cosine theta is defined as cosine theta. This is cosine theta -1 is secant. So we write in SEC theta. So this is sec theta. Then cosecant is cosec theta, which is actually just the reciprocal of sine theta, which is sine to the power -1. Then cotangent is cot theta, which is actually tangent theta to the power -1. Okay. Now this is important because I think what students get confused is actually the inverse function, inverse trigo function. Let me just explain a bit more. So if you are confused about how to identify it, one useful tip that I've learned is that you look at the third letter. So like for example secant, the third letter of secant is C, so C stands for C over here. Okay, so it's 1 over cosine. Then whereas for cosecant, this is S, basically the third letter will be S, so that's why it's 1 over sine. Third letter for cot will be tangent, so that's why it's 1 over tangent. Okay, this is a very neat trick to actually know which reciprocal it corresponds to. Okay, now look at the third letter to determine the reciprocal. So this is quite a neat trick here. Now please note that if we have cosine n theta, this is cosine theta to the power of n, sine n theta, and this is bracket sine theta to the power of n, and so on. This only happens for theta, or for n bigger than or equals to 1, like at least 1. So if you have cosine to the power of 2 theta, this is basically cosine square theta, cosine theta square, and sine cube theta is actually sine theta cube, this whole thing cube here, meaning this is actually sine theta times sine theta multiplied by sine theta. Okay, and for tangent, of course, you just multiply 5 times, right? Just keep multiplying by 5 times. Yeah, and just keep multiplying by 5 times itself by 5 times. Okay, now why do I need to specifically write this out? Because students get confused between cosine to the power of -theta and cosine theta to the power of -1. I understand the confusion here because they will say that what students will see is actually this will also apply to this, but actually it's not. Okay, now then you ask why is it different? Because it's the inverse trigo is already we already use it so commonly, right? But then that's, I understand the confusion. It looks similar, but it's not. It's just a set of rules being created and being defined by others. So basically other people's mistake, we have to just rewind and unlearn it. Yeah, so trigo ratios, the inverse trigo is something like that. When we are finding, let's say this is a cosine y equals to x, right? We want to find, we make y the subject, we will just make cosine inverse to the other side, right? So this is an inverse function. This has nothing to do with the reciprocal function, okay? Just take note of that. So in other words, cosine, this is a function in itself. Whereas if you are looking at cosine theta to the power of -1, this is actually a reciprocal function here, reciprocal of the cosine theta, which is actually secant theta. Okay, so please note this is very, very important because I think many students just get confused for this part here. All right, so cosine inverse function is different from cosine theta -1. This is the reciprocal, so this is actually secant theta, this is actually cosecant theta, and this is actually tangent theta. Whereas the one on the right is actually just a function, the inverse function. So please take note of that. And if you have any questions, please let me know, and I will see you in the next question.